You are listening to the Booktrospective Podcast, a podcast for all types of books. And even though we read all types of books across all different types of genres, we want to give a disclaimer. Many of our books and a lot of our content sometimes is intended for mature audiences. And we don't believe in censorship, but we do want our listeners to have the opportunity to decide if our episode or podcast is good for them. So, with that, let's get into the episode. Hey, it's Dominique.
And Keely.
And you are listening to Booktrospective. And this week we are doing Throne of Glass, the first book, the official Throne of Glass by Sarah J. Maas. But before we get into that, Keely, how has your week been?
My week has been fine. Nothing special. When we just did the intro, though, I almost said, and you were watching Disney Channel.
I know we gotta get you a
little wand.
I know, you can't see me doing the wand ears.
But yeah, nothing special. This week, just work, taking care of the kids and the puppies and all that fun stuff. Well, we are planning a trip to the Carmel Water Park on Sunday, so looking forward to that.
That'll be fun.
Yeah.
What did I do this week? I just built the shed. I was like, what did I do? I didn't do anything besides, I had to take a day off to get my life together. So I'm working on the shed. It's almost done. It should be done by next record. Maybe if we record on Tuesday. I don't know. But we might just have to do our interview on Tuesday and circle back to the record. But yeah, so it's got ceiling and walls and it already had a floor, but the floor isn't down. But yeah, so it's 70% done, I would say. So that's pretty much what I've done all week, and I'm trying to get my life together. Had some job interviews, hoping for some life changes. So yeah, that's pretty much it. So yeah, I don't think this will be long. This is the first of this book, which I don't know everything that she's written, but this is, if not her first works, at the very beginning. I think she wrote this in, high school. The Throne of Glass series is 8 books, I believe.
I think so, yeah.
So we'll go ahead and start with the blurb, and then we'll talk about it a little bit.
In a land without magic, where the king rules with an iron hand, an assassin is summoned to the castle. She comes not to kill the king, but to win her freedom. If she defeats 23 killers, thieves, and warriors in a competition, she is released from prison to serve as the king's champion. Her name is Celaena Sardothien. The crown prince will provoke her. The captain of the guard will protect her. But something evil dwells in the castle of glass, and it's there to kill. When her competitors start dying one by one, Celaena must fight for her freedom. Her fight for the freedom becomes a fight for survival and a desperate quest to root out the evil before it destroys her world.
Okay, so we are reading this in the romantic format, which is actually the format that Sarah said, I think sometime last year at a conference, is the way she recommends it. So we're not reading it in the purest form, which is the order in which they were released. This is the way I read it. I think we're going to read Assassin's Blade 3rd instead of 4th, which is the way I read it. And there's a form that I followed. I also did a dual read, which took me a lot longer, but I did read 2 of the books, tandem read them. Obviously, we're not going to do that for the podcast. And that sucks for me so bad, but because I prefer it that way. But yeah, so we're doing the romantic order, and a few books we'll see why it's considered the romantic order. So just, I guess, if you could describe this book in one word, how would you?
I would say I'm trying to narrow it down to one word. I should have thought about this earlier, but
It's hard. I didn't think about it either. I don't ever think about it here most of the time.
I'm just going to say that my one word to describe this book is harrowing.
Okay. I'm going to say secrets. That's my word. And before I go any further, I always forget to do this, and I want to talk about it now. So if you're not following us on TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook at Book Perspective, please go and do that before you continue listening to this episode. Also, I don't know when this episode comes out officially, but Keely's got some things going on at the bookstore. So if you are local enough to come to the bookstore, we have a readathon on August 17th at the bookstore from
6:30 to midnight.
6:30 to midnight. There is food. You can purchase tickets to just come, or you can also get a food ticket. There is a book brunch coming up in September the 14th.
Yes.
Yep. Here in Muncie also. Book Lovers Day. I don't know if this is after.
Book Lovers Day is
the 9th?
The 9th.
August 9th. Yep. So I think there are sales in the store. So I'm trying to remember to do my advertisements. So.
And we have Banned Books Week coming in the end of September, I believe. Oh. So I'm hoping to do something then. I think September 21st is Fire Up Downtown here in Muncie. A lot of stuff.
Oh, they moved it?
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
Yeah. So hopefully it won't be as hot. But yeah, so Fire Up Downtown, a lot of local businesses doing a lot of fun stuff. Great. Gonna be a fun day. We're gonna have free ice pops.
Oh, you're doing a vendor? You're vending?
No,
because you're here. Yeah.
But I'm like, we're like a block outside of the perimeter, but we're like, come out here and you get free ice pops.
Yeah, no. Absolutely. No. So that's our announcements. Also, on any of our socials, we want to do a Q&A, so make sure you drop questions, or comments, I guess. That's fine, whatever. Thoughts, theories, concerns, X, Y, and Z.
Recommendations.
Yes, recommendations, suggestions. It can be about really anything. If it's terrible, we just want to answer your question. But
ask us our favorite color.
Yes. So yeah, that's my advertisement. So back to the book. So general summary, this book follows a group of characters. Our female lead, her name is Celaena Sardothien. She is a slave in a slave camp or mines called Andover. And so the world is Aurelia. And the country that she ends up going to, or like territory or whatever you want to call it, is most of this book takes place in Otterland. And so she is in these mines. She's an assassin. She was raised and trained to be an assassin, but the crown prince comes and gets her because they're basically taking like 24 bad people, assassins, thieves, whatever, to challenge to be the king's champion, which basically means being the king's assassin. And basically she does that for X amount of years, then she can have her freedom. So while she's there, she is like a notorious assassin though, but no one actually knows that they know she's a woman, but they don't realize how young she is or know what she looks like. So they're telling her while she's there in the castle, her name is something else. So she's there. She's doing all these trainings. She's introduced to the captain of the King's Guard, basically K.L. Westfall, who I don't like. And he gives me very strong Matt Donovan vibes. And Vampire Diaries fans. And so she's introduced to him. The crown prince, his name is Dorian. She also meets a princess from another like territory or country while she's there, Nehemia. And while she is there, like, you know, these competitors, they're not really fighting to their deaths, but like they start dying off mysterious ways. There's one that is like this big bad guy who is like wants to be the best, and she is like, I mean, we've done Crescent City, and I said this then, that Bryce gives she's a very similar character to this one. She's very sassy, so Celaena is very sassy, and we love that for her. So basically as they're doing this, they're like, what is it goes from someone's killing the the challengers to what is killing the challengers. And she, you know, is basically trying to just make it through unscathed. So that is kind of the point of this book. So I don't believe that there's any spoilers for any other SJM stuff in here. I just always caution that I will say later on in the series there may be, because theories and such like that arise. But as for now, I don't think there are. But if you have not read this book, just know that. I don't know that there's triggers.
There,
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Triggers slavery, misogyny, classism, sexual harassment, rape mentioned, forced arranged marriage mentioned, trauma, nightmares, attempted suicide recounted, suicidal ideations, alcohol consumption, substance addiction, non-consensual drugging, recreational drug use, blood, gore, physical injury, dead bodies, grief, loss depiction, death of a boyfriend recounted, death of a mother, father, knife violence, poisoning, torture, whipping, animal death, hunting mentioned.
Okay. Well, those are our triggers. So, if you have not read Throne of Glass, and you would not like to be spoiled, then this is your notice to pause here and come back. But otherwise, we're going to go ahead and get started. So we open with Celaena Sardothien. She is a slave in Andover and a prisoner of Otterlin. And a guard has basically, or who she thought was a guard, is coming and like leading her somewhere. And we will learn that this is Chaol Westfall. He is the captain of the Royal Guard. He has a gold wyvern tattoo. We love a wyvern, which is the royal seal. And she wonders, is like, oh, like, am I finally going to be executed because she's a slave? But no, they actually take her into what is a throne room. And there's like a total of 14 guards in there. And she recognizes that they all have this emblem, which indicates that they're not just like regular guards. They're the guards of the royal family. And there is a very, very handsome man who we will learn is the crown prince of Otterlin, Prince Dorian. Halveyard, that's hard to say. But she like basically gets like thrown to the ground by one of the guards as she's placed in front of the prince, and he doesn't like that. He's like, you know, I thought I told you guys to like, you know, give her a bath and like treat her nicely, basically. But Duke Parrington is a character in this story, and he is with him, and the prince is like 20 or something. He tells us later in the book. So he's not like a child, but whatever. So Duke Parrington has like come with him to escort him here, and he's like nasty to her. And this is when we learn that Celaena is basically a trained assassin. She's been training, or was trained since she was 8 years old, to be an assassin, and that's what led her to be a slave here in Andover. And she looks at him and like just thinks how beautiful he is and how it's unfair to be royal and beautiful. Like, at least if they're gonna be like assholes, they could be ugly. So he introduces himself, and he wonders how she's made it like alive this long, and she still like has that fire about her even after being in the mines. And Chaol tells him how apparently Celaena tried to escape a few months after being there, and she's like 4 months, and she killed her overseer and like a bunch of other guards during the attempt. But the prince realizes that she wasn't trying to escape. She was trying to commit suicide, because the shooters are trained very well at the slave camp. Like, they can kill someone within 3 feet of like moving, and she made it like 300 feet. Like, she was hoping that they would kill her, but unfortunately the king did not want her killed. He wants her there to be alive and suffering. So the prince is just like kind of walking around her, surveying her, and he's like, you know, your dresses will cover your scars. And basically this is when he tells her he wants her to be his prize fighter for a chance to win being Otterlin's assassin. And he tells her if she wins, she'll be free after 6 years of being the king's champion, aka assassin. He wants her to compete under an alias because she is well known in the kingdom as an assassin, but no one knows what she looks like, so they won't have to like worry about her being there because they won't know who she is. And he tells her if she agrees, he'll have his father actually free her after 5 years. And she's like 3. And he says 4. So they agree on 4 years. So she is allowed to like actually go to a real room and rest for that night. And she forgets like what it's like to have comfort and like a bed. She tries to eat dinner and she throws it up because she's had like nothing to eat basically since she's been there for months. And the next day she leaves with the prince and the captain and the guard. And she's like basically trying to get Chaol to talk to her this whole time. We'll learn that Chaol's 22, she's 18, and he does not want to talk to her because he's snooty, patootie, and that's just the bottom line of that. But they travel, and like on their travels, they travel through this forest, which is known as Brandon's Forest, and we will learn that King Brandon was a king of Terrasen, which we will learn is where she is from, actually. And like the guards are making fun of like basically this world used to have fae. Like at this point in time, everyone in this story is human. But this is an SJM book. So like there used to be fae, and basically the king of Ireland, like, and they got rid of all of them. But this forest, supposedly, you know, Brandon's forest had fae, and she tells them like, you know, you need to be careful. You never know who's listening, basically. But it takes them 2 weeks to get to Otterland, and when they get there, all she sees is this giant glass castle, and she hates it. She's like, how dumb of you. Like, why would you want to build a castle in glass? Like, that's absolutely insane. And she's just thinking about, like, okay, I'm going to find a way to escape. Like, this is, like, I just want to get out of here. And as they're approaching the castle, she thinks about how she had almost freed 200 slaves herself from a place called Rithold, where there's, like, a pirate lord that oversees. And Dorian basically, like, shows her, like, hey, this is the castle. Like, you know, she's actually, the whole castle isn't glass, and so she's happy because she's not going to stay in the glass part. She stays in, like, the stone part of the castle. And we learn that the competition will start right away. It starts tomorrow. So she goes to her room. It's nice. Like, it's a nice size. And she looks for, like, anything she could use for weapons. And she sees that, like, there's, like, a billiard table. And she's like, Chaos not as smart as he thought he was. Because, like, obviously I could knock you out with one of these billiard balls. And so she, like, sleeps, and a servant comes in and tells her, you know, because she's like, oh, I'm Celaena, and she's like, no, you can't call yourself that here, blah, blah, blah. But no one's told her what to call herself, so I'm like, okay, well, how do I introduce myself? And her name is Philippa, I believe, the servant, and she tells her that basically, like, all the competitors have guards outside of their doors, so she has a guard, and that people think that she's there just as, like, a lady friend of the prince. And she's like, oh, does the prince often have lady friends? Yes, he does. Look at him. He is gorgeous. He is Gorgina. So Dorian actually, during this time, like, he goes and meets with his dad, and he looks nothing like his dad, so his dad's ugly. Because Dorian, I know there's no spoilers for Akatar, but Dorian looks like Reese. He looks like all of the main characters. He has jet black hair, sparkling blue eyes. He doesn't even really look like his mom, to be exact. But he does have a younger brother who essentially is a sociopath. Yeah. And his brother does look like their dad, the king. But he argues with his dad about the fact that, like, he feels like the competition's pointless. Like, obviously Celaena is already a trained assassin. What's the point of even doing this? Just let Celaena have it. And I literally put his dad sucks butt, basically.
I agree.
Because he doesn't care. He wants to see them fight to the death. Kael is, like, taking her on a tour the next day, and she, like, refuses to go into the glass part of the castle. And Kael's like, you are so annoying. And so he shows her this, like, clock tower, and she's like, it's hideous. It has, like, this horrible noise that it makes. And he tells her, yeah, the king built it around the time that Dorian was born, so it's about 20-something years old. Then he takes her to a library, and she's like, oh, can I get books here? And he's like, oh, you need permission to read them because, like, these are the king's books. And she's like, what? So she goes back to her room, and she writes Dorian a letter and says, surely a lowly wretch like myself could be deemed worthy to read such books.
I laughed out loud, literally.
And so he writes back to her, and he's like, yeah, you can read, but I want you to read these books first, because they're, like, from his personal collection, basically, because he wants to have someone to talk to about, because obviously no one in the castle cares about reading. And so she does nothing that day. She wakes up the next day around noon, and she sees, like, a group of women walking, and one of them is, like, a dark-haired woman in red who is talking about Prince Dorian. We will learn that this is Caltaine Rompier. She is the Regina George of this story. So she's, like, talking about the new girl that the prince brought back, which is Celaena, and how she, like, doesn't need to worry about her. She's not competition. She's a harlot. And she, like, is above them, like, listening to this, and she throws something. I can't remember what it was. She drops something, like, over the rail at them, and they're all like, oh my God, or whatever. And so she goes to get dressed. And so she's getting dressed. Philippa comes back in, and she's like, you know, you should be delighted to be referred to as one of the prince's lovers. And Kael comes in and is like, hurry up, get dressed, let's go. And he's like, we have to go see the king. And she's like, the king? And then she's panicking because she's like, oh, we're going in the glass part? I'm not going in there. But she has no choice. So essentially, today is the beginning of the whole thing, but it's just a meeting, basically. And then tomorrow they'll start competition. So he's in there, and it seems like the king's only talking to her, but he's talking to all of them. There's 24 champions in total. And he's like, you know, you better act accordingly, talk accordingly. And she's, like, nervous, shaky, pale. Like, she does not want to be in front of him. And then, like, before, like, she leaves out of there, I think it's Dorian, he, like, tells her, like, she looks pretty now that she's, like, cleaned up and, like, presentable, basically. So there's one of the competitors. He is a big guy. His name is Kane. He has like these super dark, they say obsidian all the time, obsidian black eyes. And he's like the main person that she's worried about, basically. But essentially, this competition will run 13 weeks. They'll train every day, and then once a week they'll compete, even though they can throw more competitions at them. And there's 24 of them, and so when they get down to 4 of them left, they'll have like a duel off, basically, and that'll be at like Yulemas, which is Christmas. And then whoever wins is the champion, basically. And then the king is like, thank me for allowing you to participate. Thank you, master. And so, like, after he's doing all this talking, Dorian's like, yep, gotta go. Nice hearing from you or whatever. And he, like, goes and, like, finds Celaena afterwards. And he flirts and stuff with her. He gets her to smile. And she thinks about how, like, he and her both grew up under, like, unforgiving father figures. But she actually didn't grow up with her father. She grew up with a father figure who is Arabin, who is the leader of the Assassin's Guild. So, where she learned to be an assassin. So at this point, I don't remember if it's Dorian or Chaol, but one of them finally tell her what her alias is, and her name is Lillian Gordina, and basically her mom's dead. Her dad is like kind of wealthy or whatever, but she's a nightly jewel thief who allegedly tried to steal from the prince one night, and so he brought her back to compete in this competition. And basically they ask her, like, what do you think of the other competitors, especially Kane? And she says, like, I mean, he's big, so he's probably not fast, but he could probably knock me out. So I need to be careful with him. And so she's talking to Dorian, and Celaena comes up and like, oh, Prince Dorian, blah, 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 pick me. You know, she's a pick me. And so he introduces Lillian, Celaena, to Celaena, which pisses Celaena off because she's like, I don't want to talk to this harlot. And, like, Celaena can tell that Chaol also does not like Celaena. And Celaena asks her, like, about her dress. And Dorian's like, oh, I had it made for her, which, like, you know, that pisses her right off. So Chaol tells Celaena, after Celaena leaves, that, like, Celaena is rich, basically. And literally, she was, like, carried into the palace on, like, a litter. Like, kind of like Princess Jasmine or something, like where they would carry them on the things. And her castle or wherever she came from is like 200 miles away. So they carried this girl on a litter 200 miles. Like, what the hell? So the next morning, Chaol finds out that she wrote Dorian this letter about the books, and he's like, how dare you write the crown prince, blah, 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 blah. Like, shut up, Chaol. And he takes her to training, and she's like admiring all the weapons. She's like, why would they give us all these weapons? Like, the whole book, she's like, I could just kill you right now. But Kane comes in, and she, like, is kind of, like, riled up by that. And Chaol's like, you know, you need to save your energy. He's like, you need to, like, be in the middle. You don't need to show off all your talents, but you need to be good enough that you're not the person who gets eliminated, basically. So they practice, and, like, they're sparring, and she thinks she has the upper hand, but Chaol actually takes her down. But obviously she's been in the mines for, like, months. She's lost all of her stamina and strength and stuff. So she has to rebuild all of her muscles. So the weapons master, like, comes in as they're training. He makes all of them, like, oh, let's do an icebreaker and introduce ourselves. Like, I don't freaking care.
2 truths and a lie.
Yeah, so it's like a bunch of assassins, thieves, 2 murderers, and some poison masters, basically. And so Kane tells her, like, everyone, he's like from some like mountain group or whatever, and apparently they're like known for being against the Otterlin or whatever. So she's like, I wonder what his people think of him now. But then she's like, oh, I wonder what my people think of me if they could see me. And we learned that, this is when we learned that she's from Terrasen, which is a place that was also conquered. The king is actually a conqueror. Like, he's conquered all these places. So we learned that 2 of them are murderers out of the 24, one of which eats their eyeballs of the people they kill. That's disgusting. Yeah. So that's disgusting.
Better to see you with, my dear.
Yeah, ew. So... yeah, and so she's, like, just kind of thinking back to, like, how she's worked with other assassins because she went out to what's known as the Red Desert to, like, train with them. And she introduces herself, and, like, some of them, like, snicker. And she's like, yeah, because you guys don't even know who I really am. That's why, like, you would, like, be shaking in your boots if you knew I was Celaena Sardothien. So we learned that the first test is going to be in 5 days, and Chaol tells her, like, you know, you need to stop being arrogant, and, like, he's like, I shouldn't even have been practicing really in front of with you in front of other people, because, like, no one needs to see how you fight. Like, act like the dumb pretty girl. That's what they think you are. Like, give them that, which I can't disagree with that.
Yeah.
So the first thing they have to do is, like, run. They have to do a running competition, and Unfortunately, Kane is actually fast. He's at the head of the group. So she's like, God damn it, he's big and he's fast. Like, that's a dangerous combo. So she is struggling, but she manages to stay in the middle. And she, like, they come to the end, and she's like, oh, I dropped something. She goes back, and she literally, like, throws up everywhere because I feel you, girl. I would be out immediately. Mm-hmm. I can't run a lap. I can't run 1 mile. I'm out. So they go to lunch from there, and they're, like, released for the rest of the day. So Kayal joins her for lunch, and they talk about, like, different books that they like. And that's pretty much the rest of her day. So the next morning, she's, like, already working out in her room, which this, again, gives me Vampire Diary vibes. But if you watch Vampire Diaries, and you know, like, Stefan's always in his room doing, like, chin-ups on his, like, rafters or whatever you call it. That's what she was doing. Like, she was in there, like, doing chin-ups or whatever when Kayal comes in. And they go to, like, train or whatever. And that afternoon, her and Kayal are just, like, walking around, and they see Kaltain walking with this really beautiful girl. And we learn that this is Princess Nehemia. She is the princess of Ilwe. Ilwe has actually been conquered by Ireland, so, like, technically she's really not a princess, and, like, people are like, you really shouldn't even have that title. But they still kind of treat her, like, as a formality as the princess. Nehemia is actually black. Her character is, and, like, you kind of get that from, like, the readings of it, and she speaks a different language. She speaks Ilwe. So Celaena has actually heard of Nehemia because the people from Ilwe call her, like, the light of their country, and she's actually a really big part of their resistance and, like, smuggles weapons and stuff. So she's really curious that she's here, and she goes and she speaks to her in Ilwe, and the princess smiles, and she starts immediately complaining about Kaltain, because even Kayal's like, why of all the people is Kaltain doesn't even live here. Like, why are you showing around the princess? You're not even from here. She doesn't even go here. So she asks Nehemia, like, why she's here. And Nehemia says, like, my father sent me here to learn the ways and the customs. And she's like, how do you know my language? And basically, Celaena says, I learned it from slaves, which she learned it because she was a slave with slaves from Ilwe. And so Nehemia says, yeah, my father may want me to marry someone. And Celaena's like, oh, like Prince Dorian. And she's like, he smiles too much at me and at other women, and I want my husband to warm my bed only. And Celaena tells her, you know, well, I like to read and all these things. And she tells her that the king has libraries and museums. And that's when Nehemia's like, yeah, they tore up all our stuff and burned it down. So we have none of that. So the council apparently wants to meet with Princess Nehemia, but before she goes, she asks Celaena if she will visit her so that she has someone to talk to. And so after that, she, like, basically over the next week, Celaena just keeps working out, trying to build up her strength. One morning, Kayal does not show up, and then there's, like, a bunch of guards at training, and she's like, what happened? And one of the competitors comes over and talks to her, and his name is Nox. And she notices also, like, Kane is now wearing, like, this big, gaudy, like, ring with, like, this obsidian stone in it. And so what happens is basically one of the competitors, the Eye Eater, is murdered. Like, he's found dead that morning, but, like, he's not just dead. Like, his brain was gone, his insides were gone. Like, he was, like, eviscerated. Like, he was gross. And so the guards basically are like, you know, you guys have free practice today. So she works on throwing daggers with Nox because she's really good at it, even though she's not supposed to be showing people. But she, like, Nox is terrible at it. So she's like, hey, fix your feet or whatever, gives him some pointers. And, like, the other competitors kind of, like, get on her, like, oh, because you're a girl. Like, you know, they pick on her or whatever. And we learned that Nox is actually from a city in Terrasen as well. And she thinks about how it's been 10 years since the royal family of Terrasen were killed. And he says that, you know, he thinks that Celaena will actually end up winning the whole thing. So Kayal finally shows up after lunch. But he doesn't want to, like, answer any questions about where he's been. But he tells her that he and the prince with Dorian, they grew up together, so he was basically raised in the castle, but he's from, like, somewhere else, and he's supposed to be a lord. So, like, when he was, like, a older teen, his dad made him go home, forced him to train how to be a lord, but that's not the life he wanted, so he basically abdicated his spot as a lord to come back and serve in the king's guard, and his, like, younger brother is going to be the lord, so his dad basically cut him off completely. And she's basically because she's kind of like, well, what do your parents think about this? And so he's like, well, what do your parents think about you being an assassin? And she's like, my parents are dead. They died when I was 8. So, ooh, there you go. And he's, like, looking at her, and he looks at her right hand, and he's like, well, how did you get this scar here? And she goes, well, when I was 12 and I was trained to be an assassin, basically, Arabin told her that she could break her right hand, or he could, so that she'll learn how to use her left hand. So she, like, smashed it real bad, and it took months to heal, and the whole time she had to use her left hand. So that's why she has horrible scars. Well, that's one of the reasons. So we go to challenge day, and the like announcer or whatever, the master of arms, whatever he is, tells them that to basically, like, every time they have a challenge, one of them will be deemed unworthy, and that person will be eliminated. And so today their task is to shoot arrows. So of course Kane does it. He shoots 5 bullseyes. Nox does okay, and she's the last one to go. Kayal's like, do not show off. But of course she does, because she's so sick and tired of them, like, praising Kane all the time and everyone talking about her. And she, like, so she does really good or whatever. And so afterwards, Kale asks her about the scars on her back. And she's like, you know, basically she got whipped. And he's like, well, what did you do to deserve them? And she says, no one deserves to be whipped like an animal. Like, what do you mean? And she says, literally, when I got to Andover, they dragged me to, like, the center and gave me 20 lashes and then, like, threw her down, and she was just there bleeding all night. And finally, some woman came up and gave her a salve, and then they raped that woman and killed her for doing that. So, yeah, that's why she has whip marks all down her back. Like, you big idiot. And he asked, like, well, did they ever, like, try to rape you? Like, you're a woman. And she was like, basically, like, no. Like, she basically showed them, like, you don't want to go there with me, essentially. So thankfully that never happened to her. But, like, they're, like, walking, and then as they're walking, they see a champion who basically decides, like, I'm going to try to escape. And he literally gets shot through the throat with an arrow from, like, the guards as he tries to escape. So we switch over to Dorian, and he's trying to talk to his mom about his brother, the sociopath, because his brother, like, I can't remember what it was, but he got mad about something stupid, like his coffee wasn't hot or something, like something dumb, and literally beat his servant so bad that they couldn't even cover it up. So he has been, like, sent away to go to, like, boarding school, essentially. And, like, his mom's like, oh, I wish your dad would let him come home. And he's like, no, he's where he needs to be.
Yeah.
And so this is where we learn Dorian's 19, he's not 20. And she's like, you know, you need to get married. I want grandkids, all these things. But she does not want him to marry Nehemia. She's racist, essentially, in classes. And she's like, you know, I don't think she should even call herself a princess. And she's like, what about Caltaine? And he's like, ugh. Like, no. And she's like, she mentioned somebody named Rosamund, which apparently is a girl who left him for another man. So the prince has had his heart broken. And he goes and checks on his pregnant dog. And he sees Nehemia and Celaena, like, out. And he's worried, like, you know, where is Kaol? Because I don't want Celaena to escape, basically. So Dorian goes up to them and he's like, hey, like, you know, you need to leave or whatever. And she's like, I'm teaching Nehemia stuff. And basically Nehemia wants to learn how to spar. So she's like, I'm teaching her how to spar. And she's like, well, then you do it or whatever. And he's like, I'll spar with you, basically, or something like that. He's like, we can spar later in my quarters or something like that. And, like, he's so flirty. So flirty. So Nehemia also thinks that Dorian's handsome. Like, the boy's handsome. He can't help it. But so they're, like, sparring, and Celaena's just watching them spar. And Kael comes in, and he, of course, kills the whole mood. And he's like, oh my God, go to your chambers. Everybody to their rooms now. Like, he's the grumpiest 22-year-old you ever met. Meanwhile, Caltaine is meeting with Duke Parrington because Caltaine is actually being courted by Duke Parrington, even though she does not want to be with him. She basically he, like, must have came to her house or something, and she used him wanting to court her as a way to get here to the castle because she wants Prince Dorian. Like, that's her, like, you know, that's her plan. So she asked him, like, you know, is Dorian planning on marrying soon? And he's like, well, the queen has a list of, like, potential women or whatever. And so she's like, I wonder, like, if I'm on that list. So Kael basically talks to Dorian. He's like, hey, like, you need to stay away from Celaena. She's an assassin. Dorian's pissed off, and he's like, you know, basically he's like, I think you like her. Like, you know, I think that's what it is. And he's like, absolutely not. She's an assassin. And this is when we learn about, like, the eye eater, like, that was killed, about his insides and stuff, because he's basically telling Dorian, like, all this stuff. So Celaena's up in her room, and she's playing the piano, and she's thinking of her friend, Sam. And Sam was an assassin, and he was betrayed, and he was killed. And after a while, she looks up, and she realizes that Dorian has been watching her from the doorway. And so she kind of, like, snaps at him, and he's like, I'm alone, I'm not with Kael. And he's like, how do you know how to play, like, so well? And she tells him, basically, you know, she's like, you basically made me come here to, like, be your jester and be your dad's jester. And, like, she kind of gets on him and basically is like, you're just, like, a spoiled brat who's, like, trying to use me to finally get some, like, recognition from your dad, essentially, which, you know, it kind of hurts his feelings because it's true. And she you know, she stops playing, but Dorian's like, you know, the song that you were playing sounded sad. He was like, was it for a lover? And she says, actually it was. He died 15 months ago. So Sam was actually her lover. And Dorian is like thinking like what it would be like to be with Celaena, but obviously he knows that can never happen. She's an assassin. He's the prince. That would never be allowed. So we go to the next challenge, and this time they have to like scale the castle and like capture the flag. Of course, Kane is winning again, and he's like got the easier path, and so she purposely chooses to not go that way. But she is like near Nox, and Nox goes and like starts falling off the castle. So she decides to save him, all while like kicking herself, because basically another one of the challengers starts like is like cutting him up, like slicing him with a blade, and makes him fall off. So she saves him, but she doesn't come in last place. She comes in 15th. And she's like, why did I even do that? Like, that would have been one less competitor. But she likes him, like, as a friend, so she saves him. So afterward, Kale, like, teases her about being 15th or whatever. And she's basically, you know, like, second place is the worst place. Like, I'm a loser. Arabin taught us, like, you know, there's only a winner and a loser. Like, all these things, basically. And Kale really forgot that she was trained by Arabin. Like, he's well known, too. He's the legendary assassin. And basically she tells him like, yeah, but I didn't realize all those years that he was training me that I owed him a debt, because when she turned 14 he basically told her that she had to pay him back for all the training. And so Chaos like, well, did you? And she's like, oh yeah, 50,000 or 500,000 gold whatevers, and he spent it all basically. And so she tells Kale, like, are you, like, here to apologize for the things you said to me when I was training with Nehemia? And, you know, they kind of make up. So she goes through the next two tests. We don't really get a lot of information on that, but she passed the next two challenges. No one else is killed. And she hasn't seen Dorian much either. But when she does see him, like, at challenges, he, like, winks at her. He's still being flirty. And she's like, I don't know if I'm going to make it to the final duel. Like, she just doesn't know if she's good enough. So that night she wakes up and she has a nightmare of her being back in the mines. And we learn that this like day or whatever is called Sam Ewing, which is essentially Halloween. And there's like a big feast, and like they go to the temple and worship, and she's not allowed to go to the feast, but she is allowed to go to the temple. And she's like, well, I'm not going to the temple. Like, I don't want to do that part. And she's like really upset. Like, she's like, why can't I go to the feast basically? And we learn that they'll have another test tomorrow as well, and that these tests are becoming more and more frequent. So Dorian is at the feast, and his mom's annoying him because she's like, oh, here's this lady and here's that lady. And so he sneaks away, and he goes and finds Celaena, Nehemia, and Kale all happen to be together. And Celaena ends up like leaving with Nehemia because she's like, well, I don't want to talk to you guys because I'm not allowed to go to the feast or whatever. So like, I'm good. And Dorian's annoyed because he's like, I haven't been able to see her lately. And he's like, I didn't realize that she would be so upset that she couldn't come to the feast. And as she's leaving, Celaena's thinking like, like Kale looks kind of handsome today. Blech. So like we get a little bit of love triangle brewing here. So Nehemia asks her like, can you teach me like the language so that I can stop going to those like insufferable tutors and just spend time with you, like an hour every day before supper? And Kale hears this and he's like, no, absolutely not, basically. Or, well, no, he doesn't hear it because she speaks in the other way, but basically Celaena tells him that, and he's like, no. And Nehemia's like, I'm a princess, like I trump you basically. And as they're like out talking, like they see this soldier like covered in dirt. He's like sneaking around the clock tower. So they go and investigate it, and there's these weird marks in the dirt, and we learn that these are called word marks. And Nehemia knows what they are, and they're kind of like, she kind of seems like spooked by it, and she knows how to read them. Celaena has no idea what they even are, and she's fine. So she tells her like, look, if you teach me about these word marks, I will go ahead and tutor you. So they make an agreement. So that night in bed, Celaena's laying there, and she notices like there's a tapestry on the wall, but it seems like it's moving, like there's a breeze. So she gets up, lifts it up, and she sees that there's a door like cut into the stone. So she opens it. I never would have gone in here. And she's like, oh, there's a passage. So she like gets like candles, and she gets chalk and like yarn to like find her way back. So she's like walking. She goes through like one whole thing of yarn. She goes through a whole nother thing of yarn and like has to get her chalk out. And like there's all these different like archways and staircases and all these things. And she hears water running, and she's like, oh my God, there's a way out of here. So she finds the sewer basically, and she's like, I wonder if the king even knows that it's here. And she's like, you know, lucky me to find a room that has a freaking exit in it. So she decides, like, I'm not going to escape. Like, it's not my time. But at least I know that this is here if I ever need to. And so she goes back, and there's, like, 2 different archways. But, like, one of them, like, she hears whisper. And she's like, it's Halloween. Like, I'm not messing with the whispering tonight. So I'm going to go the other way. So she goes the other way, and it leads her, like, up a lot of stairs. And she realizes that she's above the feast. So she can see Kayal, and she can see Dorian. And she's thinking how she wants to kiss Dorian. I'm like, oh, we all want to kiss Dorian. And she sees Kayal, like, get up to leave, and she's like, oh my god, I wonder if he's coming to my room. So she, like, books it back to her room, dives on her bed, and, like, lays there. And so all of a sudden, it's Dorian that comes to her room first, and he sees her, like, sleep in her dress on her bed. And as he's standing there, Kayal comes up. He's like, what are you doing here? And, like, drags him away. And, like, Dorian's like, what are you doing here? Ariana, what are you doing here? And so they're both like, you know, like, what, I feel like it's that Spider-Man meme from, like, where they're all, like, pointing at each other. So they're all like, you know, why are you doing here? But Kayal's like, well, she's an assassin. Like, please tell me you don't come here at night or whatever. And Kayal, like, knows in his mind, he's like, I know I'm wrong. Like, he's like, I shouldn't be questioning or talking to him like that. But Dorian leaves, and he's like, I'm not jealous. Like, Kayal's like, I'm not jealous. This isn't jealousy that I feel. Like, yes, it is. But he's, like, wondering, like, he also is like, does Dorian know, like, is she a virgin? Like, does he want to be with her? Like, all these things. So he goes into her room, and he wakes her up a little bit, and he's like, I have a present for you. And he gives her this ring that was given to, like, all the other ladies at the feast. And then he covers her up and she goes to sleep. And that night she dreams of the passage. So she goes down into this room, and there's, like, this old wooden door with this strange skull knocker on it. And inside, she sees a sarcophagus of a man and of a woman. And they have crowns on. And then she sees, like, a word mark on it. And she's like, oh, this is a bad place. Like, I got to get out of here. So she starts to run, but she trips because it's like the word marks are, like, coming up everywhere in the ground and the walls, like, everything. And so then she looks at the queen sarcophagus, and she's like, she looks so familiar. And she notices her ears, and they're pointy. And she's a fae. And she's, like, the only fae queen. And she realizes who this is. So this is King Gavin, the first king of Otterland, and Queen Celaena, who was Brandon's daughter and the queen of Terrasen. And she wonders why no one has come to honor them on this day in their tomb. And then she sees the sword of Gavin, which he used to defeat Erewhon, which Erewhon is, like, the big bad in their history who, like, tried to take over their world or whatever. And someone starts speaking to her and says, you know your history. And she's like, what? And it is, like, basically a ghost of Celaena. But she's like, I'm not a ghost because I don't haunt this place. But, like, obviously she's dead. So she's a ghost. And she says that, you know, I took a risk by coming here, and so are you. And she tells her, like, everyone's distracted tonight, those who guard us. And basically, like, she's like, Celaena, nothing is by coincidence. You were supposed to become an assassin. You were supposed to come to this castle. And she says, you need to forget your friends and your debts and your oaths. And you need to stop the evil that's in the castle. And she's like, the evil wants to open a portal and let in all these bad things. And she's like, you must be the champion. Do not let them catch you here. And it seems like she's getting, like, pulled away. And then all of a sudden, Celaena hears this, like, growling. And so she just, like, is, like, running and getting pushed by Celaena. And the queen gives her this necklace, and she says, wear this. It will protect you from harm. And she says, someone led us here tonight, and they want us to learn, and that basically your courage of the heart is rare, and so use it, basically. And Celaena's like, I am not who you think I am. But Elena's, like, throwing her out of there, like, up the stairs, and she lands on her bed, and she wakes up, and she's like, I hope this, she's, like, holding something. She's like, this is Kayal's ring. This is Kayal's ring. It's not. It's the amulet necklace that Celaena gave her. And she looks at it, and it has 2 overlapping circles and, like, a stone in the middle that looks like an eye. And she looks at the door, and it's ajar. So she gets up and, like, closes it, make sure the tapestry's over it. And she's, like, in bed. She doesn't hear anything, but she's just, like, holding a knife. And she decides, like, I'm going to try and do some research into what Celaena was saying. So Kayal busts in the next morning. He's like, where were you last night? And she's like, in my bed. And she's like, you know I was in my bed because you came and you gave me this ring. And he's like, well, the rest of the night. And basically what we find out is that another champion has been murdered and that the test for today has been canceled. And she's like, I was in my room all night, asked my guards. And so he leaves or whatever because it's like 5 o'clock in the morning. It's really early. And she's like, I want some more rest. But really she goes back down and she finds the room with the sarcophagus. And she wonders, like, why me? Like, why is this happening to me? And so she sees later that day, she's like walking and she passed by a dead body, and it's another competitor. And this time, like, their body is split completely open. His face is like contorted into a scream, but like his insides are gone. There's a hole in his brain, or in his head where his brain should be. It's gone. And he has word marks on him, or like around him. So now at this point, there's only 16 of them left. So Kale goes to practice with Dorian, and basically they like pick up their conversation. So he's like, how many nights do you go and see her? And like Dorian's like, well, how many nights do you go and see her? Like, they're basically still doing this whole like love triangle thing. And Kale's like, it's not what you think. Like, I'm going like as my duty or whatever. Like, no, you're not. So Celaena is in her room, and she decides to go and take a walk. So she goes and she finds Nehemia, and they walk in the gardens. And it's almost winter at this point, so it's about to snow. And Nehemia's like, I've never seen snow before because it's really warm where she's from. And Nehemia like looks at her and she's like, are you okay? And she's like, yeah, I'm fine. But she can tell something's off. And Nehemia's like, you should come visit to Ilway sometime. And she's like, yeah, I would really like that. And they see Cain, and she's like, is he bigger? Like, he looks bigger than before. And he tells her wearing dresses doesn't make you a lady. And he looks at Nehemia and tells her, like, basically she's not a real princess or whatever. And he tells her, he's like, hit me or whatever. And he mentions her time in Andovier. And so she realizes, like, he knows who I am. So she goes to practice, and Chaos there. And Chaos like, you know, you need to learn some control. Like, you're fighting too wild. And so she leaves and she goes to the library, and she wants to research like the word marks. But Chaos is like hovering everywhere she is. And he's like, you know, I thought word was just like a word that meant like fate or religion. And he's like, are you bored? Like, is that why you're looking up this stuff? And she's like, no. And she's like, it's not a religion. She's like, it's not mentioning any of the stuff about our gods. And she's like, I don't know. It just interests me. And she's like, word. She says basically, allegedly, a word god came through from another world through what's known as a word gate. So she keeps researching. And essentially, like, gates are not like a real thing, and humans cannot see them, but they can appear or be summoned. So, like, they're not like when I say real, they're not like a physical thing. And some of them are good, some of them are bad. Sometimes bad things can come through them. So there's all that. So she sees this book, she picks it up. It's called The Walking Dead, which I thought was hilarious.
Yeah, I chuckled a little bit at that.
And she doesn't remember pulling it off the shelves, and she doesn't know where it came from. And it smells like earthy, like soil. And she feels like she heard like a growl. And she's like, did you hear that? And Kayla's like, no. So then she's like, I wonder how these books even got here. Like, I'm surprised the king would even like let them like survive, basically. And now she's like, okay, I hear scraping. She's like, do you hear that? And like Kale like scoots over, he's like dragging his like sword along like the floor or whatever, basically because she's reading all this spooky stuff and he was trying to scare her. So back in like, this is like the next day or whatever, Celaena's in her room, she's playing billiards, and Dorian comes in, and they actually end up playing for like hours because he can play, she's terrible, she never wins, but they're actually like laughing and enjoying each other. And like it's late, so she's like asking him as she falls asleep, does he think that the murders are on purpose? And he's like, I don't think so, but she falls asleep. So they have another test, and this time they have to spar with each other. So she gets knocks, and she like does her thing or whatever, but she's just so tired of Cain, and she's so tired of pretending to be weak. And she disarms like one of the other like people or whatever, and she tells like the master in charge or whatever, she's like, give me like a real challenge, basically. So she goes into her room and she like is admiring the tapestry, and it just makes her think of Terrasen and home. And we switch over to Caltaine a little bit because she is with the queen and she is having a headache because Caltaine has all these headaches. And so she's basically trying to figure out how she can stall Parrington because her goal again is Dorian. So she's trying to like butter up to the queen, and she's like, you know, Dorian's just shy. Like, he likes being here with you. And she's like, you know, he's just shy. And she's like, the queen's like, oh, I already knew that. I thought you were going to tell me something like important.
Something juicy.
Yeah, something juicy. And she's like, I was hoping you could tell me about this mystery girl. Like, is Dorian with this mystery girl? And so, of course, Caltaine's pissed off because it's Lillian. And the queen compliments her, and she's like, you know, it's a shame that you're already with Parrington. And she's like, oh, I ain't got to be with Parrington. Like, I can leave him or whatever. So Celaena and Kale are practicing, and she tells him, like, look, Cain knows who I am. And she's starting to get stressed out because the murders, like, keep happening, and she's like, you know, am I going to be next? Like, are they killing people, like, for a reason? Like, what's going on? And as they're practicing, a servant comes up and tells Kaol, like, another body has been found. And this time when they see the body, because she sees it, it's like, it's the same thing, but it's like there's claw marks on the stones or something, and it's like the beast sharpened its claws. And she can tell that from the person that died that they had like been trying to claw themselves away with their fingernails. And she's like, it looks like the beast stopped and sharpened its claws while it watched this person try to crawl away. Like, it's so weird. So she also notices that there are word marks again around this body. And so that night Dorian comes to her room and he's like, oh, like, are you into history now? Because he sees the books that she's looking at. And she asks him again about the murders. And he's like, you don't have to worry about them. So that makes him makes her kind of think like, okay, is it Dorian? Like, is he taking out my competition because he doesn't think I can win? And he asks her to play the piano again, but she's like, I can't. It brings up bad memories. And he just kind of like opens up to her. He's like, I really want to know you. I want to know more about you. And she's like, I'm an assassin. That's all you need to know. And he asks, well, can I just ask you one question? And she's like, fine. He says, why do you like music? And she says, because I can lose myself in it. She says, for once, I'm not destroying, I'm creating. And she tells him how she used to want to be a healer, which is something she's never told anybody. So she asks him, like, why he's not married yet. And he doesn't want to answer, but he tells her, I don't want to just marry just to marry, basically. And she's like, I mean, a marriage is just like a contract. Like, you don't... She's like, you can love other people. And he's like, no, like, I want to love my wife. Like, I want to marry for love. And she starts to kind of like pick on him, and he's upset, and he's like, you're picking on me. And she's like, look, you're the crown prince. Like, you have the ability to like change rules and make changes here. And he's like, that's kind of treason that you're talking about. And she's like, no, it's not. Like, I'm literally talking to you about what you're going to become. And he kind of gets close to her, and he's like, your eyes are so beautiful, but like, they're strange. Like, they have this ring of gold around them. And then he notices the ring from Kaol, and he's like, where did this ring come from? But she doesn't tell him. And that night at dinner, Kaol notices something weird with Duke Parrington. He's like looking at him, and it's almost like his face changes and his eyes get really dark, but then it goes right back. But it happens multiple times, and it doesn't appear that Celaena notices, but he feels like Duke Parrington is like watching him.
Oh, you know what? I did not catch that.
What?
The whole like eye change kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. So that night, Elena comes again in her dreams to Celaena and reminds her like she has to keep going. And she's like, well, can you like help me? And she's like, I can't tell you anything about the upcoming challenges, but she's like, you need to look to your right. And so like she's like, well, to the right is just the tapestry. Like, I don't know what to do with that. But the next day, another champion is found dead. And so like she's not sleeping at this point. Like, she doesn't know what to do. There's only 13 of them left, and today's test is about poison. So they're forced to basically like try different drinks, and like if there's antidotes so they don't kill them, but like, they might suffer a little bit. But she's able to find the right one. And Nehemia like takes her out afterwards to see the puppies because Dorian's dog gave birth, but he's mad because they're like mutts. And there's one that's kind of like a runt. He's like, well, I'm just going to kill it. And Celaena's like, absolutely not. And so he's like, okay, I'll give it to like a family if you want me to. So she runs into Kane in the hall, and she like runs because she's like, he just keeps getting bigger and bigger. Like, I know I'm not imagining it. Meanwhile, Celaena is smoking opium because she like her headaches are just really bad. So she's like smoking opium, but she doesn't want Duke Parrington to know that she's using drugs basically. And that night, Nehemia comes running into Celaena's room, and she's crying, and she's like, what's wrong? And she says that basically the Otterland army slaughtered like all 200 of like her country's rebels, like all of the women and children as well. And she just feels like she failed her people. So Kaol comes in later, and he says he heard about Nehemia, and he just says, you know what, I think I might be wrong. Like, he's like, I think I might have been wrong about things. And Celaena just like vomits. He's like, oh my God, are you sick? And she's like, no, I just have my period again because I'm finally able to like eat like a normal person. So, after that, Dorian comes later, and he's like, can you please just start calling me Dorian? Because she calls him like your highness and stuff like that. And he tells her that, she's beautiful. She tells him that night that, she's from Terrasen because he wants to know more about her. And he asks, oh my God, like, do you hate me? Because he realizes that obviously they conquered Terrasen. And he's like, you must hate me. And he ends up like kissing her on the cheek, and he leaves. So it is Yulmus, and they are going to be having a mass ball. And so this is like shortly before that. Chaos sees her walking with Dorian in the garden, and he feels like he should like make sure that she doesn't snatch up Dorian. Like, she's been here for months now. Stop it. Like, right. Stop it. You just want to be down there. You just want to be down there. And he's like, you know, he's pretty sure that she'll win the competition, but he also knows that he's being ridiculous. And so Dorian, as they're walking, he asks like about the necklace that she's wearing, and he's like, you know, I read about a necklace from King Gavin that he gave to Elena, and about him killing Erewhon. And basically the necklace looks a lot like the eye of Elena. And she's like, why would I be wearing the eye of Elena? Like, that's stupid. So she goes to her room and she notices that there are word marks all over her floor. And she's like, oh my God, like, am I next? Like, does this mean I'm next? So she washes them all off and she just like leaves. And so she goes to the library and she finds Nehemia there. And Nehemia is reading like a thick book. And she's like, how are you reading that? And she's like, that's above like any level of tutoring that we have done. And she realizes that Nehemia doesn't need a tutor. She reads just fine. And so now she's like, oh my God, Nehemia lied to me. And so now she's starting to wonder, is Nehemia the killer? So she wants to confront her, but she needs more proof. So she's like, I'm not going to do it just yet. So the final test is going to be in 3 days. And then after that, they'll do the duel. So she wakes up and it is Yulmus, and her bed is like filled with candy. And she is such a kid. She loves it. She just eats all of it. It's like bonbons and like chocolates and like, I don't know. That's what I can like picture. Because like her, like, Philippa comes in. She's like, your teeth are red. And she's like, I wonder who like brought me this candy or whatever. But she sees Dorian later, and it was Dorian. And he also gives her another present. He gives her the dog that he was going to get rid of. And she kisses his cheek and she apologizes for not giving him a gift, but he is like stuttering and stammering, and he's like, okay, thank you. I gotta go, bye. And she's like, he's flustered, like, interesting. So she is planning on going to the ball tonight because Nehemia will be there and she wants to keep an eye on her. And she knows that Kayal will be mad, even though it's a masquerade and they're going to wear masks. So they go to like, they always do like a ceremony before, like the same thing with Halloween or whatever they called it. And so she like falls asleep, and she like looks at him, and Kale like shoves her, and she's like, what? And she's like, how long has it been? And he doesn't know because he was asleep, but he woke her up because she was like drooling on him. And part of the ceremony is that like some of the little kids like will like pick random people and give them gifts. So a small girl comes up to her and gives her like this golden arrow and is like, many blessings to you. And she turns to Kale and is like, here, I guess I can't have this weapon, can I? Mm-hmm. So afterwards is the ball. So she goes to her room, she gets dressed, and Philippa's like, she's like, I don't think you should go. Like, and Celaena's like, okay, like if I get caught, like I won't tell anyone that like you helped me or whatever. So she gets dressed, and the guards don't even stop her. They're like, save a dance for us, like have a good night or whatever. So she gets there, and Dorian is like shocked to see her at the ball, and everyone's like, who is this girl? And Kayal pulls her to the side and is like, do you think this is a good idea? Like, Dad, please sit down. And she's like, I was lonely or whatever. And she's like, why does Nox get to come? Like, the other challengers are here. Like, why am I the only one that doesn't get to come? She's like, he's a freaking thief. Like, there's stuff to steal in here. So Nehemia, like, sees them, and Kayal basically tells her, like, you can stay as long as you want, as long as you don't do anything. And Nehemia is like, well, I'm getting ready to leave because I don't feel well. So she goes back in with Kayal, and she's like, can you stop frowning, because no one is going to dance with me because you're scowling and you're scaring them off, which is so funny. Like, just, it makes me think of Twisted Games.
Yes.
When Reese is like doing that every time she's dating somebody. But anyway, so she's like, no one's gonna want to dance with me. So like her and Kayal are like getting close, and they both realize like to the other, like, oh, like they look good, like, oh, okay. But Dorian comes up and is like, why are you guys not dancing with anybody? So Dorian's like, do you want to dance to Celaena? And Kayal's like, it's not a good idea because it'll give too much attention. Like, and I said, I hate him so much. Like, you are annoying. Go find you something to do. But he's like, Kayal, why don't you shake the night off? Like, yes, Prince Dorian, like, tell him to go sit down and have several seats. So Celaena feels bad, but she wants Dorian. So she's like, okay. And he's like, you look so beautiful. And Kayal, like, stands to the side. He's trying not to be jealous. And someone comes up to him and is like, is that the girl? Like, or basically is like, is Dorian, like, in love with this girl? Because, like, look at how he's looking at her. And Celaena is like looking at them and she's like, I gotta kill this girl. She's like, I gotta eliminate Lillian. She's gotta go. So Dorian, like that night, he walks her to her room and finally kisses her. And she like really likes it. And she's like thinking about how he's so different than like when she met him in Andover, which makes her realize, oh my God, I'm kissing the Prince of Outerland. What kind of traitor am I? And she's like, I'm going to bed alone. Good night. And like slams the door on him basically. So she has her dog. She ends up naming the dog Fleetfoot. And Dorian comes to her the next day and then like apologizes if he was being too forward, basically. And meanwhile, Celaena goes to Duke Parrington and is like, how do we get rid of Lillian? Like, she's got to go. And he tells her the truth. Like, he's like, that's not Lillian. Her name is Celaena. She's a challenger for this competition, yada, yada, yada. So she's like, how do we stop her? And he's like, well, we can't. But she does have to duel for the championship. And so they concoct a plan to poison her during the final duel so that Kane can overpower her and she'll die, basically. So Celaena realizes that the word marks are coming up because they are summoning a creature. And she thinks this whole time that's Nehemia because Nehemia can read the word marks. She's being real suspicious. So she goes down the passage and she sees footsteps and she thinks, oh, it's Nehemia and the creature. But she hears a voice, and it's a man, and it's Kane. And he is even bigger than the last time she saw him. And she's like, it has to be magic. And she sees him summon the demon. And the demon, like, bows to him. So he's under the control of Kane. And he hears her and says, you know, it wasn't meant to be you tonight, but I'll take the opportunity. And his eyes are, like, so black and, like, soulless. And he ends up locking her down there. But the creature hasn't attacked her yet. So she's like, I can't die down here. No one will even know where I am. And I don't want Nehemia to think that I think this about her. Like, I have to get out and prove. So she makes a run for it. And she runs to the tomb. She grabs Gavin's sword. And she is able to, like, defeat the demon. But it does get, like, a nice bite out of her hand. So she gets to her room. She's still bleeding. And she, like, literally collapses and passes out. And she wakes up to someone calling her Lillian and grabbing her. And it's Nehemia. And so she, like, cleans her wound, basically, and she starts, like, writing all these, like, word marks on her. And when she wakes back up, her wound is completely healed. Like, there's no mark or anything. And she's like, this is magic. And she, like, sees Nehemia, and she's like, what happened? And so Celaena tells Nehemia who she really is. And Nehemia says, like, why didn't you tell me? Like, did you not trust me or whatever? And she's like, no, like, the king ordered me not to tell. And Nehemia tells her, like, it did hurt me for you not to trust me, and I don't want that, and she doesn't want secrets between them anymore. And she's like, I'm going to rename you. And she names her Alentia, which basically means one who cannot be broken. And she basically asks her to tell her, like, everything. And so later, Celaena goes to walk with Chaol, and he seems upset. And he's like, oh, did you have fun dancing with Dorian last night? Like, please, please go away. And she wants to tell Chaol everything too, but she knows, like, he can't. He's a cop. He's the ops. She can't tell him anything. And she knows that he won't like her having access to exit, so, like, she definitely doesn't want to tell him. Like, he'll probably have her room switched. Plus, she's like, I killed the demon anyway, so, like, everything should be good from now on. And he basically is like, you know, you need to be careful with Dorian. Use your brain. You don't know what you're getting into. And I'm like, is this your friend or not? I thought Dorian was your friend. But okay. So they are walking and they run into the king in the hall, and she wonders if he knows about the magic because the king basically eliminated everyone in the world that had magic. Like, he's killed all the fae and everything off. And the king was gone. Like, right after she was, like, brought to the castle, he said he was leaving for travels, and he came back and everyone that was with him died. Super, super sketchy. So she's like, how did he survive? So they go to practice, and Nox can tell, like, something's off. He's like, what do you know? Tell me everything. And he's like, I know that you're not a jewel thief, but he doesn't know who she really is. And he, like, just asks. And so the final test is tomorrow. And so tonight is the last night that they're really at risk. So she tells him, like, you need to leave. You need to save yourself. So he sneaks out that night and he is gone. So Celaena, like, sees the king in the hallway and she feels like she sees stuff, like, floating around him. But she's like, did I just smoke too much opium? Like, am I high? Am I high right now? So she's like, okay, maybe not. But later, Celaena is with Dorian, and she realizes, like, you know, he doesn't really, like, look anything like his dad. Like, maybe he's not like him, and she kisses him. So that night, they, like, canoodle in bed, and they're, like, kissing, and he hangs out with her. And the next day, the last test is canceled because Nox is gone. So they don't know if he, like, everyone else doesn't know if he was murdered or anything. So they cancel the last test. So she knows now that she'll have to come face to face with Cain in a duel, and she just hopes that she can like tire him out by outrunning him to like lower his stamina. So we go to the final duel, and it's being held outside, and it's Christmas now. So it's snow, it's cold. Caltaina's like, why are we outside? It's cold. Celaena's like, it's freezing. Why are we out here? And so Caltaine has basically, their plan is to poison one of the goblets because they do like a toast. And so she's like trying to keep track of that. So the king and everybody comes out, and he addresses them. And she has to go second. So Cain like duels. So there's 4 of them. Cain duels somebody, then she duels somebody, and then whoever the winners of those 2 matches are duel each other. So he fights his challenger. He defeats them in 3 minutes. So she fights hers, and she's like, or what? Before she even fights him, Nehemia comes up and like, because Kael tries to give her his sword, and she's like, I don't know if I should take that. So Nehemia comes up and gives her this like staff, which represents Ilwe, because she looks at Dorian, and Dorian kind of gives her a look like, that's like pushing it. You're pushing it. But she takes the staff, so she does her like duel or whatever, and she beats her person in like 2 minutes. So she's like trying to show up Cain. And so after that, like they immediately go into a fight with her versus Cain. So the king doesn't give them any downtime. And so she goes to fight him, and she starts feeling nauseous and sluggish. And she's like, what is wrong with me? And she hears Caltaine laugh, and she knows, like, I was drugged. And so he starts beating the absolute crap out of her. He is slamming her, punching her, stomping her, everything. She's bleeding everywhere. And Dorian is like, what is going on? She's like a puddle of blood. He wants to call it off, but he doesn't. Also, like, they're basically like in a ring. So there's like a chalk line, and like if either one of them steps out of it, then they're disqualified. And so Cain starts talking to her. He's like, I expected better than this. What would your father say? And she's like, my father? Like, no one even knows my father. Like, he died or whatever. And he says to her, I can see under your wall that you built. And he's like, what was it like to wake up with your parents covered in blood? And she's like, how do you even know that? And things are like going dark. She's like going in and out. And then she starts like seeing things, and she's like, everyone's gone, and then she's like back, like it's like she's like going in and out of worlds. And so then she sees like these boots come up, and she knows it's Kael, and he's like, get up. And she's like right at the edge of the chalk line, and he's like almost like begging her to get up. And then Cain grabs her and like slams her into the clock tower, and she starts freaking out because she sees all of these creatures like flying, slashing at her. She's like in a different world, and Cain rips the amulet necklace like right off of her. So Dorian is horrified because Celaena starts swinging and screaming at nothing. And he's like, is she like crazy? Is she seeing things? Like, what is going on? And so Nehemia comes up, and he sees her, and she's like writing symbols in the air. And Celaena's like thinking, okay, I'm going to do this. Like, I won't be afraid. I am not going to die. But then all of a sudden, it's like all of these doors come out of nowhere in this like world that she's in. And she can like see Cain, but he looks like a demon, and like these things are slashing at her. And all of a sudden, Elena comes out, and she's like has this sword, and she's like slashing at the demons. They're falling. So she rushes over to Elena, and Elena puts up like this barrier, and she tells her, I can't protect you for long, but I can remove the poison. And she's like, once the poison is gone, you won't be able to see me, but you won't be affected or see the demons anymore. So she starts drinking this poison, and she like, it hurts. And Elena starts to disappear. The demons start to disappear, but this blue mark starts to appear on her forehead. And Nehemia tells her like, stand up. And as she does, the king is like, what is that mark on her head? And so she goes to attack Cain, and she goes to attack the side that Kael like told her to, because he doesn't protect one of his sides, and she like stabs him. And she considers killing him, but she just like looks at the king like, finish this. And he's like, he announces her as the victor, and like she drops Cain and like walks away from him. So she runs over to Kael and Nehemia, and they all embrace her, and Dorian is like, get a healer. But Cain like is not finished, because you know the killer's never dead. And he comes up pulling his dagger, and Kael just stabs him in the heart, and he smells like death and decay. Like, he smells awful. And so all of a sudden, Celaena just starts talking like this nonsense to Dorian, like saying, she saved me. And he's like, what? And he just picks her up and carries her off to her room. So Caltaine is pissed, because she's like, what? Like, why didn't she die? I thought you told it was, she like turns to Duke Parrington, and she's like, you said that would work. Like, what happened? And the Duke is like, what's that in your hand? Like, all loud. And she's like, what do you mean? Like, you know what is in my hand. And he's like, oh my God, you poisoned Caltaine, or you poisoned Celaena. And literally he acts like he had nothing to do with it. And Caltaine gets dragged away, and he goes to the king and is like, see, I told you she would do anything for the crown. And Celaena is like, wow, I played right into his hand. So this whole time, she thought she was using him to get to Dorian, and the whole time, he flipped on her and had her, now she's going to the dungeons. So, Dorian goes to his dad, like, wanting to know, like, what happened to Chaol, because Chaol also gets dragged away after killing Cain. And the king is like, you know, because Dorian's like, he saved her, and he's like, he saved an assassin. Like, that's not an honorable thing. But he's like, I'm not going to get rid of a perfectly good captain, so, like, I'm not going to do anything to Chaol. And he's like, Dorian asks him, like, okay, so what are you going to do with the assassin? And he's like, I don't know. Like, she kind of sucked in the final round. And he's like, maybe I should just send her back to Andover. And he's like, what? And Dorian just, like, he hates his dad. And he's like, you know, you're too attached, basically. So Celaena wakes up in her room, and Nehemia is there. And she feels terrible. And Nehemia tells her, like, I saved your life. And Celaena's like, so I didn't imagine it? And Nehemia says, no, my powers let me see the demons, basically. And she says, I have been pretending not to know things because I wanted to have you as a friend. She says, the word marks are to fight against evil, and my family passes down the knowledge, but I basically should go to prison for it or be killed. So they keep it a secret because even though, like, she used it for good reason, it can also be used for bad. So she was the one that was drawing the symbols under her bed, and she's like, yeah, and you kept washing them off, so I had to keep writing them back, basically. And she tells her, you know, Chaol does care for you. And she also knows of Elena because she's the one who summoned her. So she's basically the reason that Elena has been around. And she's like, I don't know how Cain learned about the word marks and all those things. I have no idea. But she tells Celaena, like, the only reason I'm here is because I came to spy. I do not want allegiance with the king. And so that's kind of like they're reconciling there. So later Dorian comes in and he's like so upset. He's apologizing. He's like, I'm sorry I didn't call it off. And Celaena's like, no, I'm glad you didn't because like that would have disqualified me. I don't want you to call it off, basically. So the king is talking to Duke Parrington, and he's actually kind of glad that Dorian like stood up to him or whatever for once. But he basically asked Duke Parrington, like, what was that mark on Celaena's head? And he's like, you know, I need to investigate that because I will kill her, like, if it means something. But he's like, I've got other stuff to deal with first. So he asked Parrington, did you use the ring on Celaena? So now we know that the ring that he has, because Duke Parrington has one, and the ring that Cain have, they mean something. And basically, Duke Parrington had been using the ring on Celaena, but that is what was causing her to have those headaches. And she also was just, like, starting to look very sickly. So he did not use it on her recently. And the king is like, you know, I think it's a good power. He wants to keep investigating it. So the king does know about magic use, and he's okay to use it to his benefit. So Chaol comes to see him, to see Celaena, and she thanks him for saving her life. And he apologizes for, like, that thing he said about her parents. And she basically tells him, like, what happened. Basically, she woke up in their bed thinking that, like, they were wet from the rain and they were dead. Like, they had been slaughtered. And she basically had slept in the bed with them thinking that they got wet with the rain, which, like, I mean, obviously she was a kid, but, like, that is, like, a crazy thing, like, for someone to just lay there and be soaked. But yeah, but, like, she was a kid, she didn't know. And so she, like, they hug each other, and Dorian finds them, like, hugging. And so Chaol leaves, and Dorian tells her, like, the king finalized your contract, he agreed to the whole 4-year thing or whatever. And she tells Dorian, like, look, we can't be together, like, I'm the king's champion. And he's like, I know, like, that's fine. And she's like, no, like, I don't want to have another secret, like, it's not going to work out. You are the prince, I'm an assassin, like, it's just not going to work. And she's like, I do want to be friends. And he's like, fine, like, he's hurt, but he does agree to it. So Chaol comes back and he's like, you know, I want to tell Dorian, like, you know, it wasn't what he saw or whatever. And she's like, you don't have to worry about it, like, I ended things with him. And that night she has a dream with Elena again, and Elena tells her, you know, you could, something about, like, alter the stars in the sky or something like that. She's like, you need to stop being afraid of your power. And she goes to see the king the next day, and she signs her contract. But the king tells her, if you don't return from one of your missions, if you don't do everything with, like, unyielding, undying loyalty, I will harm Chaol, I will harm Nehemia, and he'll even harm Dorian, just to prove his point. And that is the end.
Delphine.
So, what'd you think?
I really, really liked it.
Yeah, it's good.
Yeah.
It's there are similarities, but it is different than ACOTAR and Crescent City. Yeah, I do like it. What'd you rate it?
I rated it, I think 4.5 stars.
Yeah. I think I give this a 4. I don't know what I rated the first time. I would have to look. 4 or 4.5. Obviously, I have more favorites in this series, and so I just know the potential. But I do really like it. Any thoughts for the next book? Anywhere you think this is going? We have an assassin. We kind of got our team building up here.
I have no idea. I knew that, this was going to be coming in our list of series, so I've been purposefully staying away from all spoilers and
that's hard.
all of that. So I have no idea, and I'm excited to be surprised.
Yes, I'm excited for you to start having revelations. Okay, well, reviews.
Yes, I want to point out that there are 1.6 million ratings on this book. That's a lot.
That's crazy.
That's a lot. And over 115,000 reviews.
That's crazy.
So with a 5-star review.
Dun, dun, dun.
Okay. This is a 5-star review from Bryce Rocks. So this book took my heart and crushed it like a wad of paper, then tossed it in the trash. But was it worth it? Yes. Celaena is everything I want to be. An assassin. JK. But am I? I've got enemies. It was a girl who returned my book with doggy-marked pages. I will find you. Nothing brings me more joy than seeing her kick butt. And Dorian, that's it. When Celaena finds Fleetfoot, her puppy, this review is bouncing
All over the place, yeah.
But yeah, me, Fleetfoot, and Dorian live happily ever after. There are no more books.
Okay.
And then okay, here's another 5-star review, and it's 2 sentences. So, I didn't think I'd ever read anything by SJM after ACOTAR, but here I am, and I loved every freaking thing about this book. Oh my god, I loved Kaol, and I love Celaena, and Dorian's an angel, and the story is perfect, and the writing is amazing, and man, this was good.
I agree with all but Kaol.
And then for the 1-star review, characters were badly written, the plot was full of telling instead of showing, very underwhelmed after hearing for years that this was the YA series to read. I don't mind unlockable characters. Heck, I love them. But it didn't feel I was supposed to dislike our main snowflake. So tired of the strong female character who can kill everyone in a heartbeat, but she's tiny and incredibly pretty and hates all other women. And, also everyone wants her just because. Yeah.
Okay. Those were feelings.
Yeah.
All right. Well, our next book is More Than Life by Bethany Finger, and we will also have a interview with her, with the author, in that episode as well. So that's our first time doing that. So we'll see how that goes. I think it's fantasy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah. So that's all we've got. But again, we did all our announcements in the beginning, so there is that. And thanks for listening, and that's all I've got today.
That's all, folks.
Bye.
Bye.